Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining Social Hall tonight, and thanks to the Social Hall organization for allowing Men's Club to co-host tonight's presentation. This is the Men's Club's third event in conjunction with Social Hall. We hope that you've enjoyed the Men's Club programming this year. I just want to give a little bit of a plug for an upcoming event, although we have a couple planned. One coming up on May 2nd for Men's Club. We'll be honoring a couple of individuals. I'm not going to announce the names at this time, but you'll get publicity on it within the next couple of weeks. But two individuals in the community that we are titling the program as service to. It's a service to community award. Couple of individuals that are just absolutely spectacular in what they've done for the community, more than just community service. That's why we titled it differently. So it's a service to the community award. And what's going to be different about that night is that in past years, we've done a man of the year in other events, and we're not going to be able to do that because our board decided that those are better conducted in person. So this one, since we're doing it by Zoom, we are going to be providing everyone with an online order that you can place for essentially a hors d'oeuvre or a dinner menu. It's going to be Mediterranean theme. It'll be enough for two people. If you want to order a couple more for the household, that's great. We'll even be offering wine as a service. And the Men's Club board will be, for those that need delivery, we will provide delivery on the day of the event. So everyone can join in. It's going to be an evening event. Uncork the wine, have a boxed meal with us, and enjoy the program. I will give a teaser. We are working on having one of our local members of Congress as our guest keynote speaker that night. I won't tell you his name. I won't tell you that he was involved with the first Trump impeachment, but we're still working on all the details to see if we can secure that individual, but we're keeping our fingers crossed. So with that, also let me thank a couple of my co-conspirators that are on tonight. Jack Singer is our vice president of Men's Club program. Stu Miller is our secretary. Both of them have been very instrumental in our programs this year, and I want to thank them both personally for their efforts here tonight. So let's get on with the program. We've got Dr. Don Diamond, who was raised in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and I have a very detailed bio for him. So I'm going to just cut and paste. Don, if I butcher it, please correct me, fill it in. But we'll go from there. Apparently, he got this minimal degree in AD from some minor university. I think it's called Harvard or something. Over on someplace in the East Coast with high honors, published a seminal paper on RNA with his mentor, Dr. Hans Blairock, and it's had over 3,000 citations. He followed a 2-year fellowship after that, and then left quite an indelible mark about the focus and how to achieve success in science. He carried his approach to City of Hope, which I believe he came to there in 1989, which is when he joined our community about the same time. And he's had quite a fruitful career, including securing patents. He's had multiple academic publications, involved with clinical programs, and he is not shy about speaking and has been involved in numerous domestic and international speaking engagements. He's also a professor in the Department of Hematology and former chair of the Department of Experimental Therapeutics, a multidisciplinary laboratory comprised of 30 tenure-track faculty, physicians, fellows, technicians, and graduate students. Don is considered a leading expert in vaccines for infectious disease, including but not limited to HIV, CMV, HCV, influenza, and emerging pandemic pathogens such as coronaviruses. He often serves as chair or member of the Division of AIDS Phase 1 and 2 clinical trial applications, vaccine and infectious disease applications of the NIAID and the NCI special emphasis panels as needed. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Don. And Don, you may want to go ahead and tell us what some of those initials actually mean. So thank you for being here.
Let's, first of all, thank you very much. It was, more than what you needed to say, and but certainly appreciate it. I didn't mention about my 8 years at the Jewish Day School, or Gratz, in Philly, but that also is part of my resume. In any event, I'm happy to be here tonight, and I thank you all for sharing your evening with me. And my topic is a discussion of my efforts in my laboratory in developing a COVID vaccine, as well as what is the state of affairs with other COVID vaccines. And I'm happy to answer your questions about either the virus, which you may know is called somewhat different. It's called SARS-CoV-2. I see already we got a question. The disease is called aptly COVID-19. So just as a small primer, so SARS-CoV-2 is a member of the coronavirus family, and I don't have all those slides showing that they infect bats and other species, including camels. And in fact, just a very brief history about the coronaviruses. So I have to admit, I actually chaired a panel at the National Institute of Health when the last impactful coronavirus became a household word, in many households, namely SARS. And so SARS, you might remember, was a respiratory virus that caused a lot of furor and actually killed quite a number of people, in the hundreds, though. People were terrified of it, but it wasn't particularly transmissible, so it sort of died out. And people in the industry, as well as in the government, were to some degree annoyed that all these preparations to develop vaccines and therapeutics and all of the hype and the fear mongering came to nothing. A few years later, another one of these coronaviruses made, it's called, they're zoonoses, zoo meaning, animal. And so they move from animals to humans. And so they're zoonotic pathogens. And so another one referred to as Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, became, it crossed over from camels to people. And it turned out to be incredibly lethal, much more lethal than our current variety. And it killed quite a number of people, in the thousands. But as it turned out, you could avoid getting exposed if you didn't sleep with your camel. You were much less likely to be exposed. So, most of us in the United States don't have that pleasure of sleeping with our camels. So it never sort of crossed over into the United States. And it also fizzled, although periodically it comes back. You don't hear too much about it. And I imagine there are warning signs in Saudi or other places warning people not to sleep with their camels. So that was then. And so we dial forward. There weren't really any other transitions, I'm trying to think of the right word, from the animal kingdom to the humans in terms of coronaviruses for a number of years. But as we all know, and what we're still discovering, the gory details, is that somewhere in late November, early December, there was some sort of transfer of a virus from either a bat or this sort of strange animal that looks actually sort of cute, a pangolin, in presumably, but not 100% sure, in a place that I've never been to. I've never been to China, Wuhan, China, and the Huanan, sounds sort of like a restaurant, seafood market. And that's what people have decided, although the WHO hasn't yet been convinced. And of course, we know that from the past administration, and probably some of it objectively, is that WHO is a political animal. So we're not really sure whether they're just kowtowing to one of their major donors, which is the People's Republic, or they're actually doing a job of actually trying to figure out where this came from. So there is, as it turns out, a famous virology research institute, whose name has now escaped me again, in Wuhan. And there's a very famous scientist who's known as the Bat Woman. And it's not because she looks like a bat, but she goes out in the field and cultures viruses from bats, and has studied the physiology of bats. Well, at one point, she was considered a possible villain in this whole process, but it's becoming more clear that this was an unfortunate circumstance, and different people from different political stripes will decide to call it, how they see it. My understanding is that the what we call the genome, or the DNA of this particular virus, is very much related to a bat virus or a pangolin virus. It's not 100% assured that this was not man-made. However, people are not that smart. I can tell you that from members of my laboratory. And it is unlikely that people could have predicted what would be a very transmissible virus, such as what we have. So I don't know how much I'm boring you. I probably am. But I will continue a little bit about the background. So it's called the coronaviruses. There are 7 of them that we know about. There are probably 100 we don't know about, that are just waiting to, make that transition from the bat kingdom to the humankind. So we do have, some concern about future zoonoses. So it's quite a large virus, in that it has a very large piece of DNA. It's circular, so it's just a circle. But it actually, the way it is constructed is that it's actually not DNA. It's the same material that some of us who have been vaccinated, and I presume a number of people in this call have been vaccinated. It's called RNA. It's not messenger RNA, but it's RNA. And that's probably all you really need to know about. And so it's quite a long stretch. It's 30,000 what we call bases or letters. And so there's quite a lot of what we call genetic material. And it makes a number of different proteins. And interestingly, it has an enzyme that it replicates because it needs to keep dividing in order to propagate and transmit, from one person to another and cause its mischief. But this particular enzyme, which we call a polymerase, meaning that it makes a polymer, that polymer is the RNA, and the RNA is its genetic material. So, here you know about as much as I do already. So the polymerase actually what we call is proofreading. So if there is a mistake, it actually has tremendous powers to correct that mistake. And so I only bring this up because it's not really a cousin. It's from a totally different family. But HIV, or human immunodeficiency virus, is also a RNA virus. But unlike coronaviruses, it doesn't have proofreading. So basically, willy-nilly mutations are inserted. And so that's sort of why HIV is a tremendous problem until today. And I remember Tony Fauci, who I've known for 30 years, talk about developing an HIV vaccine, and we still don't have an HIV vaccine, but we do have a lot of coronavirus vaccines. And probably one of the main reasons is that this proofreading ability limits the number of changes or variations. We'll get into the variants, and because it's very interesting about them. But suffice it to say, if you're infected by HIV, in a couple of weeks, you have hundreds of thousands of different variants. Right now, after all of these people, and it's probably, you hear or you may look at the Johns Hopkins site and say, oh my God, there are 100 million people who are infected. Well, I hate to tell you, it's probably 500 million or a billion people who have already been infected, because you only get tested if you feel like you've been exposed or you're symptomatic, mainly that you feel like crap, and then you head to a testing site, which up until recently was Dodger Stadium. And I had a number of people in my laboratory go to Dodger Stadium and wait a couple of hours to get tested. If you're in India or Pakistan or Russia or whatever, you're probably not getting tested, but you're probably in many cases becoming infected. And so, I do actually find all of the aspects of the social aspect of the virus more interesting, because I spend all day thinking about how to defeat it and all the other molecular nonsense that we do in the laboratory. And so if you don't know, and I know probably most of you by now know, it's amazing that infectious diseases has had this amazing renaissance. I mean, it's sort of like I've been waiting for my whole damn career for this. So those of us, who do infectious disease for a living, I mean, this is like manna from heaven. I mean, obviously a lot of people have passed, and this is probably not politically correct, but anybody who knows me, and now you do know me, is that I speak my mind. So for those of us who are virologists, it's a huge challenge. It's obviously been very devastating, and we certainly respect all of those people who have passed unnecessarily because of this virus. But I will say that some of the things that we have learned since what really began likely simultaneously in Seattle, as well as in the East Coast, that inside gatherings are ways for which the virus is more easily transmitted. And so one thing that I'm going to tell you at the beginning, and I will emphasize it at the end, is that having Zoom calls right now, if you haven't been vaccinated, is the way to stay safe. And when we get into the variants, which we will, that is another concern, but it may not be quite the concern if many of you look at social media, because that may be sort of an overstatement. So I could go on extemporaneously. I did bring some slides. I'm sort of debating what to do, because slides often are quite stilted. And I may, so I'm presenting tomorrow night to get some money out of my institution. I work at the City of Hope. So I did prepare this thing, and I hate to read things, but of course I do want to hit on all the things. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just go through these slides, and it'll be somewhat stilted, but this way I'll hit all the main points. So I'm trying to share my screen, and now I got to find the presentation, and I'm going to hit share, and now you all see it. And I'm trying to make it into a slideshow. So can you see it? Hello? Anybody?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, we can
Okay,
see
good,
it, Don.
good, yeah. It's not my forte to do things. I always allow somebody else to run the Zoom meeting. So the only person who is very familiar with this is Jana, because she is a member of the team that is consenting patients for this clinical trial. So I'm going to sort of go through a little bit of just some of the background. So I'm going to be talking about some basic stuff, but just to say that we are running a clinical trial, and we're doing this at the City of Hope because my laboratory developed a vaccine, which we it's such a cuddly name, COH04S1, but that's what they wanted to call it. If it was my institution, I might call it something else, but it isn't. We are enrolling people in this clinical trial. So I talked a little bit about this, that COVID-19 disease is the result of getting an infection from a coronavirus. And we already talked about that the virus jumps from, we don't know whether it jumped from the bat to the pangolin to the human, or directly from the pangolin to the human. Someone ate a pangolin, a bat dropped some feces on a pangolin. We just don't know, but we know that it got transmitted. And so it is a rapidly spreading virus, and it's basically everywhere. So I annotated this, and a lot of people follow this Johns Hopkins Center. I can't remember what it stands for, but as of yesterday, there are 106 million people that they know of have been infected. My guess is it's 500 million to 1 billion people, and the 2.3 million people, it's probably 20 million people who have died worldwide as a result of it. In the United States, it's probably also an underestimate. We're probably at about 100 million people, and deaths probably are more carefully counted in the United States. Obviously, a huge tragedy. So there are lots of different vaccines out there. You may have been vaccinated with the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine. Those are RNA vaccines. You may have heard about the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is turning out to be a dud in South Africa. And then there's the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is advertised as possibly a single shot vaccine. That remains to be totally resolved because the immunity after one shot is not that great, but it may be enough to keep you out of the hospital or 6 feet under. And then there's a company called Novavax, which was a very small fledgling company. They did have some powerful government officials who used to be running that company, namely Rick Bright, who is a very nice guy. He's a whistleblower, and he made quite a name for himself, but he also used to be in Novavax. That's just to say that one of the oldest professions, not necessarily the oldest, still is quite active in the government. Namely, people go from one position to another, and money is often an incentive. So these vaccines, as we know, the two vaccines, Oxford and Moderna, are in the United States what we call EUA, or the Emergency Use Authorization. The reason why they haven't been authorized is that the FDA rarely, if ever, authorizes a vaccine until at least 1 to 2 years have passed. While I happen to believe, even though they're my competitors, that they're reasonably safe, one doesn't know what might happen a year from now. I don't think anything will happen a year from now. I'm not a fear monger. I also don't think that the Johnson & Johnson or the AstraZeneca or the Novavax, actually the Sanofi one, is that they're reformulating it. So there are some disappointments and disasters. So turning to what we have done at City of Hope. So we started in February. It was a month too late. I wasn't as quick to the draw as I should have been, but we did start in February. We had to collect some cash to do this because I was a bit nervous that this would turn out to be SARS and MERS and would peter out, but it didn't. And so a lot of work went in between February and when we started producing the vaccine clinically for a clinical lot, actually at City of Hope in the building next door, which made it convenient. At the same time, we evaluated it in various animals. I apologize. I know not everyone is a big fan of evaluating things in animals. The way I look at it, because I do a lot of cancer work and I do a lot of work with our stem cell transplant recipients. I'm a good friend and colleague of Steve Foreman, who is a member of the synagogue, as well as Joe Gold, who I've worked with quite extensively in the clinical manufacturing. So we do use various animal species, and the first animal we used are mice, and the mice proved very valuable in that they demonstrated that our vaccine caused the mice to develop immunity. And we use that coupled with these little guys called ferrets. They're not allowed in California as pets, but we were working with a facility in Kentucky, of all places, the University of Louisville. They happen to have what's called a biosafety level 3 containment facility. And so we vaccinated the ferrets with our vaccine, and we got some blood from the ferrets, and we looked and we saw that there were antibodies that were made in the blood of the ferrets that were specific to our vaccine, and were also specific to cause the prevention of the coronavirus, the actual authentic coronavirus, from infecting cells. So we knew, we were dealing with the right stuff, and we're now actually working with monkeys as well, although we're dealing with humans at the same time. Because China was, as you know, they were a little bit annoyed with the United States So they put a freeze on monkey exports. And so we had a devil of a time of getting our hands on some monkeys. And so finally we got some monkeys from St. Kitts. And the monkeys are actually in Gaithersburg, Maryland, far away from us. And they're being vaccinated as well. And eventually they will be given the SARS, and we will see hopefully that our vaccine protects the monkeys because the FDA asks us to do something like that. Meanwhile, we presented to our ethics board as well as to the FDA that we believed our vaccine is safe and that we should be allowed to conduct a study in human beings. And actually very quickly, they gave us permission. They had a couple of questions, they always do, but they gave us permission, mainly because I've been working with similar vaccines for about 20 years. And people get vaccinated and they survived that vaccination quite well. So they were somewhat trusting, and so far so good. So as I mentioned, we lovingly called this COH04S1, and it's made, the vaccine itself, it's actually ingenious. One of my collaborators, actually someone who reports to me, I asked them to develop something that we could use to, in essence, avoid or bypass our lovely government because they had decided that something that they had given us many years ago, that they now wanted to get royalties and big time royalties for our use of it. And while I was not particularly pleased with that, that term about the mother of invention. So I told the gentleman that make something that we can avoid all of these government patents and make it so that we would control the outcome. And so we did. And so we made, and actually it's a little bit complicated to talk about it, but we actually made a synthetic version of a virus. And even though I'm very happy that our virus has turned out to be an interesting vaccine, the eureka moment was when he put all the goodies together and out popped the virus. So we had 3 inanimate, what we call plasmids, and put them together, and we needed to use what we call a helper virus. And, voila, a day or 2 later, we started having what we call progeny viruses coming out because we labeled them with a fluorescent marker. And, we could see this fluorescent marker. And that to me was really the big moment. The rest of it was sort of more routine. But the actual making of the virus was, to me, in my career, one of the sort of satisfactory moments. So like many of these companies, we took what we call the spike antigen. So the spike is the antigen or the protein that the virus uses to get into cells. And so it's called a receptor. We also have a receptor. It's called the ACE receptor. And some of you may be aware of ACE because it's involved with heart care. And in fact, a lot of people our age use what are called ACE inhibitors. And in fact, there was a huge worry about, well, if we suppress ACE production in the body, that people may be more susceptible to high blood pressure and what that brings. But as it turns out, that was probably a false alarm. And there isn't that much concern, even if you are infected by COVID, about that aspect. There are other problems. There are other problems that SARS-CoV-2 causes, and in fact, there are vascular problems. But in terms of continuing to use your blood pressure medication from the New England Massachusetts Medical Society recommends, and we'll have a number. Let's face it, we got a lot of doctors in the house here, and they'll tell you to continue to use your heart medication. So our vaccine is still a virus, but it doesn't grow in humans, but it can provide these proteins that our immune system will react to. And so they recognize that they're there, and it's better for us to react against a vaccine than to get infected, because it's basically a similar process, except one of them can lead to tremendous morbidity or problems that we are familiar with, and death, whereas our vaccine and all the other vaccines are reasonably safe and don't lead to death. And that's really the triumph of vaccines in general. So just to sort of go backwards, we talked a little bit, you're now experts, and there will be a test. We talked about that we plucked some genetic material. We actually make everything synthetically. And, I always find this sort of ironic. Most of the genetic synthetic material was made from a company based in Wuhan, China. So in fact, at the seat of the epidemic was the seeds of, how to get rid of the epidemic. And no COVID was transferred during this process. So we made our vaccine, as I mentioned to you. We developed antibodies, and we developed these things called T cells. And what we are promoting with our vaccine is that our vaccine causes a very strong spike response, but it also develops what we call a T cell response. And a T cell response may be more long-lived, but right now we don't know whether that helps or not, or whether our vaccine a year later will provide you better immunity than Moderna or Pfizer or whatever. So those are some open questions. So now we're in the clinical trial again. And so what the FDA always asks us is that we choose a dose that's so low that it's the same dose you give a mouse. And so that first dose, which says 10e to 7th, that's actually 10 million particles of virus. It's not exactly that, but we'll just say that for this purpose, it's 10 million particles. And I'm happy to say that 10 million particles actually caused an immune response. I don't want to say anything more than that, but we're quite happy with the 10 million particles. And what we're actually hoping is that the immune response that these 10 million particles provoke in a human will be sufficient to match the immune response that, well, first of all, our competitors cause. And we know from those clinical trials that that immune response is highly protective. So, we know that in a few months, so it's 2 months after the final dose of the 2-dose regimen, that 95% of people who took the vaccine, the both doses, are protected from becoming sick. I will tell you one thing, and this sort of answers the question. None of the trials actually address the problem of that you could acquire the infection, not be sick, but if you cough on somebody, you could make somebody else sick. And even if you're vaccinated, because the load, as we call it, the viral load, is not eliminated. These vaccines do not cause what is called sterilizing immunity. So it's not that if we were to pump some virus in your nose, that it would be immediately eradicated. No, it won't be. We know that from the animal studies that took place, we found out that monkeys don't get sick, et cetera, but they do harbor virus. And so what we know already is that these vaccines do not prevent an individual from harboring a virus. So what we're going to do as the trial goes on is go to a higher dose level, since the first dose seems to be safe. And, we hope to develop even greater immunity, although I'm still hoping that the lowest dose will be sufficient. The reason being, it's simply a practical matter that the less you give people, the more doses you can make. And then people like the Gates Foundation, something called CEPI, Gavi, BARDA, which is an American, this Operation Warp Speed, took all the money from what's called the Biodefense something Defense Agency, and then used it in a very actually ethical way to develop all these vaccines. This gentleman, Moncef Slaoui, who is actually a giant in the field of vaccines, did actually, in my mind, some of the best work, or the only good work, from our friends from the previous administration. Really did a wonderful job in bringing out these vaccines quickly. And obviously the distribution is not perfect, but that's, another thing we can talk about. So we're, in our vaccine trial, going to be looking whether people develop this infection over a year. We don't know whether our vaccine is protective, but that's the point of going through these trials. We're also giving a number of people a placebo, a sugar pill, because we need to figure out, if you get the vaccine, do you what we call mount an immune response? Do you make an immune response? Or is that, some sort of fake placebo effect, as it's called, that anybody would make, even if they're given a sugar pill? So that's why you do this. It's called a randomized controlled trial. You may have seen this thing called RCT, although I bet you didn't. So in our trial, the FDA was very, very nervous about the initial stages of all the vaccines because of something that was found in the early days of the SARS epidemic, where people were investigating vaccines. There was something called ADE, or antibody-dependent enhancement. So some people, it's actually not people, it never got to people. Some animals who got the vaccine and then were given the actual pathogen fared worse than if they just got the pathogen. And so the idea was, and in fact, if you were listening carefully, which I doubt most people were, when they allowed His Highness the Pope, Tony Fauci, to speak from the podium, he would mention about this thing called ADE. It's never occurred, luckily, in all of the therapeutics and all of the vaccinations and all of the COVID infections. So this is a bit of a plug. So if you're greater than 18 and less than 55, and I assume that that's very few people here, but you have children and grandchildren, and they're all eligible, possibly. We still need people for this trial because everyone at City of Hope, for some reason, was considered essential, and they all got vaccinated. So 5,000 or 6,000 people all of a sudden disappeared as candidates for our vaccine. So if you know somebody, your own kids, your own grandchildren, come on, let's get them enrolled. So that probably is not an FDA approved statement, but in any event, so all of the visits, and there are a number of visits, occur in a well-organized, recently remodeled clinical research center named after the Briskins. you have a screening visit. And then if you qualify, and we've really reduced, in essence, if you breathe and if you don't have some really major what we call comorbidities, some sort of very, there are things that, especially as we know, as we get older, that's why we've tried to limit it to people between 18 and 55. Essentially, if you breathe, you probably will qualify. And so we will give you 2 shots of the vaccine separated by 28 days. And interestingly, now we got the FDA to agree that 28 days after your second vaccination, we will tell you whether you got the placebo or the vaccine. And then we're pretty confident that you can get vaccinated. Well, certainly if you got a sugar pill, you can go out and get the regular vaccine, or you can get our vaccine, however, whatever floats your boat. So we have 10 visits. The secret is that probably you don't have to go to all these visits, but if you're interested in how things develop, we take some blood, using a trained phlebotomist. We ask you to spit in a cup. That doesn't take any training, and we go through the whole process. And it's possible, although I cannot say this, you never know who's on this call. It's possible you'll be protected, but I can't say that. I don't want to go through all this mumbo jumbo. So the screening, we do look to see if you have had or if you have currently some other infections. We do a brief medical history. You can't be pregnant while you're taking this vaccine. We ask, people practice literally abstinence in some manner, not to get pregnant, because then we have to report that to the FDA. We check if you've had a previous infection. We sort of don't want that, mainly because we won't be able to tell if our vaccine is what's causing you to make the antibodies or the actual virus. So we give you a physical exam. You get a lot of physical exams, so you'll be, if something comes up, you might be told. And then you get vaccinated. You can get vaccinated on a Saturday if you wish. I know it's Shabbos, but you're doing a mitzvah. So there are many days that you can get vaccinated. So the research is being done, obviously, because we want to have really the best vaccine out there, and we think that our vaccine can be that. So just moving to the end here, if you're interested, there's a telephone number, and that'll take you right to someone who will pick up the phone, and it won't be a machine, and it won't be coming from India. It'll be someone in Duarte, the center of the universe, California, who will answer the phone. Or if you're bashful, you can use this email, covidvaccine@coh.org. So that sort of ends the presentation. Let me stop sharing so you can see my beautiful face. So I want to talk a little bit, unless I'm talking too much, about the variants. So what are the variants? The variants are forms of the virus that have evolved because the virus has been in people who have immune systems. And those immune systems pressure the virus, to stop replicating and to stop dividing. And the virus, wants to survive. It doesn't have a brain, but it wants to survive. None of us met Darwin, but we all know about Darwin, or most of us know about Darwin. I assume most of us don't believe in creationism, so Darwin is the man. And so the virus evolves and it mutates. Why does it mutate? Because these antibodies that we make, in some cases, are effective. And in other cases, what happens is that people who have compromised immune systems, and we know that there are plenty of those types around who recover from whatever they have. And the virus can infect them and they can be treated, but the virus stays in them for a very long time. And so the virus, in order to survive, mutates. And so what's happened? The virus has mutated all around the world. What we don't know a lot about is that how it's mutated in the United States. Why? Because we have a crappy system of surveillance. But in England, they know quite well, and you may have heard of the UK variant. And so prior to the UK variant, there was actually an Italian version. So the Italian version was a change that made it much more transmissible. And, I'll stop with the jokes, but, it was a more transmissible Italian virus. And it spread all across the United States when, tourists came from Italy who must have, at some point met somebody from China. Someone from China came to Italy, transmitted the virus from someone from Italy. They got on a plane, came to the United States, coughed on somebody. Lo and behold, that virus became actually the dominant virus very quickly. And so all of the virus now that is in the United States, by and large, is from Italy. But now we have some other problems. We have new variants from the UK, and we have a variant actually was published recently from work from Cedars-Sinai. We have our own Los Angeles variant. I mean, is that something to be proud about, So that variant is not quite as transmissible as the new form of the UK variant. So the UK variant, because they, like us, have never gotten a handle on the virus, had tons of people who had the virus. Well, the UK variant eventually decided that it wanted to live. And so it also mutated again. And it's a very cute name. The mutation that it has, it's called the EEK mutation. Very lovely. So the EEK mutation also developed simultaneously in the South African variant and in the Brazilian variant. So while it's cute, it's killing people by the droves not because it's more lethal, it's just that it's 50 to 75%, depending upon which strain, much more transmissible from A to B. And so now, if you cough on somebody, it's far less droplets that will cause another person to be infected. Well, if you're outside, let's say in Yosemite, and you sneeze and you're on top of, Yosemite Falls, right? And there's somebody in the valley, they ain't going to get sick. But if you're all together in a small space, someone might get sick. And so all I can say in the ending, and I'm happy to address any questions about the variants, is that wearing a mask by now should be second nature, unless you are with a loved one who is, maybe not even a loved one, but someone who is cohabiting with you, and you already know that they're not infected. You don't know anybody else in terms of their infection status, because about 30 to 50% of all infections, you don't know yourself you're infected and nobody else knows you're infected. So you can't take it as an article of faith that because you're not sneezing, you're not infectious and can harm somebody else. So the social distancing still operational. Stay away from social gatherings and wear a mask. And don't be 100% sure that you got vaccinated with the existing vaccines that you're totally protected. Because we know from South Africa that one of the major vaccines from the company called AstraZeneca failed miserably. And so people, while they won't, as it's turning out, likely in droves be hospitalized, or worse, they can transmit it to someone. And if they haven't been vaccinated, they could be in deep doo-doo. So the message here is that the variants are like a new chapter in this unfortunate saga. And they unfortunately don't guarantee you to be totally protected in terms of transmission of the vaccine to hurt somebody else, while you yourself may be protected. So anyway, that's my uplifting story. But I can tell you that all of the vaccines right now are looking as though even if you are infected by the variants, protect you from hospitalization and death, which are, obviously important items. I will say also that the variants are coming. They're not here in droves, but the South African variant was recently found in Houston. The British variant is doubling in frequency every 10 days. And we don't have too much of the Brazilian variant, but when it was first cited in Manaus, Brazil, it devastated their healthcare system quite quickly. So this is not to be played with, and this is, obviously a serious matter. And I'm going to stop here because I probably put everyone to sleep. And I'm happy to take questions. It looks like there's some. And so I will look at those questions. And so let's see here. Anyway, thank you for your attention. And, we should have had this maybe later, because it would serve like a sleeping pill. You could listen to me and all of a sudden fall asleep. All right, so ignore the question.
Hey, Don.
Yes.
Don, could you go to the last question?
Yeah.
That was just by Ira Blitz.
Sure. The Moderna and Pfizer are called vaccines. The definition of vaccine is when some of the virus or viruses in the shot as yours is. This is not the case with them. Do you believe that theirs are more gene therapy, RNA, DNA, instead of being called vaccines? No, I don't. Vaccine, is a Greek or Latin word, coined a long time ago. So a vaccine is something that elicits immunity. And the RNA, the way it's now, so the RNA is packaged in fat, okay? It's just lipid fat. And so the RNA very quickly, when it enters the cell, degrades. It doesn't, in fact, invade your genetic material. It isn't passed on from generation to generation. So to me, it's not gene therapy. I know what gene therapy is, and it's not gene therapy. It is a much more, I would say, simple method to deliver a vaccine. I didn't invent it. I had nothing to do with it. I wish I did. I would be coming from an island somewhere in the South Pacific or in the Caribbean. But I don't. So what caused the 19 epidemic to end? Unfortunately, in that case, and this is sort of a message why this idiot from Stanford was such a crazy lunatic. Indeed, in that case, herd immunity was involved in the, we'll say, the end of the 1918 pandemic. And I guess the whole idea, the Spanish flu, how it arose, was the only place that actually was honest to say that we have an infectious disease. It probably came from Kansas, and it came over during the war. And CNN did a really nice comment, whatever you call it, show on it. I can't think of the word, but so many people died. A lot of people got infected. I'm from originally, and I hate to admit it, from the Philadelphia area. The Mummers Parade turned out to be the mother of all super spreader events. And there was talk about not having it take place. It turns out it did take place. The soldiers who got infected went all over the world. You may know our president, when he went over to Europe, became infected, and that, in fact, really affected him in his judgment for the rest of his life. So, yeah, the pandemic flu of 1918, serious matter, but it ended with herd immunity. Clearly, the type of herd immunity that we talk about here, it's slightly different concept, and I'm not sure that we would wish herd immunity on all of us, because if it's the virus that does it, then there are a lot of people who will unnecessarily die. The herd immunity, that could be a whole hour, which I'm not going to bore you with, but it's definitely a topic of conversation. So, anybody else have any questions, or
Yeah, there's
have
a number of the questions that have been posed I think have been answered by you through your discussion. But
Oh, yeah, we don't want to go over this, but I will tell you.
Yeah, there's one by Gail where she's read that it's likely that we'll have to be vaccinated year after year.
Well, that's my hope, because that way I can sell my vaccine. It's hard to know. It's hard to know. I mean, frankly, no one really expected to be developing, as we are, a vaccine to defeat the variant so quickly after we all got vaccinated. So nobody knows what we call the durability of the immunity, or how protective it will be a year from now, mainly because we've only been at this a year, and the vaccines have only become available to us, in the last few months. So we don't know how long the immunity will last. We're doing a clinical trial at the institution where we've asked some volunteers who have gotten the Pfizer vaccine to give a little of their blood, and we'll look and we'll measure antibodies, and we'll see whether, how long they're protected, as we will for our vaccine. So very possible that we will need to be revaccinated a year later. We don't know if this thing's going to go away or not. That's sort of simplistic terms, but we'd like it to go away like SARS or MERS. It may not. As I said, that will keep me in business, until I retire. So I'm not sure what my feelings are about that. Certainly, I think it's less likely that it will cause the damage that it's caused initially, because we will have some sort of immunity built up. Whether it's perfect immunity, is a question to be determined, but we will likely have some immunity. Is there another one that I should be addressing?
Any other questions?
I have a question. Two questions, Don.
Yeah.
One is the trials for the vaccines that we now have seem to have only taken about 6 months, and yours you say is going to take at least a year. So how did they get their trials, other than enrolling 30,000 people? How did they get their trials done so quickly, or how did they move through the stages so quickly?
Well, so you're because I know you so well, Phil. So you're equating apples with oranges. So those trials haven't ended. It's only that they got the top line data because they had what's called the primary endpoint, was the number of infections. But the trials continue, and they're still collecting data. And that data will be collected for 2 years if they want to get marketing authorization from the FDA. So those trials haven't ended. It is an interesting point. When there were no alternatives, it was pretty easy to sign up people to take a trial vaccine. Now that there are alternatives, it is more difficult. I can tell you that our trial, we vaccinated our first individual in December, and I am disappointed that we haven't gotten further along, but it's been 2 months. The main reason that I am figuring is that we haven't marketed this thing sufficiently. But people between 18 and 65, although we only will take them up until they're 55, they're not being vaccinated right now unless they're essential workers. So, I'm hoping that people will rise to the occasion so that we too can finish our trial. But the main reason why they were able to enroll people so quickly is that we forget when those vaccines first came out, there were no alternatives, and so this was a way to possibly protect yourself. Was there something else?
Yeah, Judy, you had a question?
Just where are we with children's vaccines?
Well, all of these, so the way it works with the FDA is that you first, in general, go through the motions with adults, which has already been completed. And then you move down from either 11 to 16 or so now it's 12 to 16. And the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are being investigated 12 to 16-year-olds. They were having trouble recruiting kids, obviously for the obvious reasons. Parents, of course, get in the way, but they are, presumably acquiring, more kids. Now, until that trial is done, we're not going to go to true pediatric trials, which is, 0 to 12. That's not going to happen until there's a readout, as it's called, top line data from 12 to 16. And then we'll move on to the younger ones. There are some issues. They're not as prevalent with this it's sort of it's an inflammatory condition. Was it MSC? There are doctors here. They can help me. What's it called, Jana?
Multi-system inflammatory syndrome.
There you go. So occasionally, and if it's your kid, then it's not occasionally anymore, can be affected by that. But kids are vectors. I mean, maybe not as efficient as adults, but they can pass it to somebody else. So yeah, they should get vaccinated, just like they would get vaccinated against hepatitis or some other pathogen. But they're not there yet. They haven't recruited enough kids or developed enough data to state that the vaccine is both safe and effective in the 12 to 16-year-olds. When that's finished, then they'll move on to the younger ones.
Another question.
All right, do we have any other questions?
Sorry. One other question. Don, you mentioned the sterilizing immunity that the vaccines don't seem to provide that. Yeah. And so it seems like without the sterilizing immunity, the herd immunity, you're going to have to get to not just 70% coverage, but you're going to have to get to really, if a lot of us are still harboring this vaccine, it seems to be much harder to get out of the pandemic.
Well, so think about it sort of realistically. I mean, we don't develop sterilizing immunity when we get a flu vaccine. And, some of us get the flu, sure. Older members among us will, in a small percentage, although significant, pass from a flu infection. But by and large, you recover from it. So the concept here is that, and that's why I said herd immunity is a very difficult subject. It has a lot of bad connotations, frankly, for me. But you can develop immunity, and 70% of the population can develop immunity. And so the virus is transmitted to the next person, and it will more quickly get snuffed out. There is a period of time where you can transmit it, but you may be transmitting it to somebody else who has immunity. And so more quickly, the virus will run out of places to hide. And so it is possible that, these numbers are really, they're cookbook numbers, but, somewhere between 70 and 85%, the virus will run out of places to hide. So even though you may be harboring it for a period of time, and you may even pass it to somebody, that person is going to have enough immunity that, maybe they get sniffles, maybe they get a cold, but they're not going on a ventilator. So that's a bit reassuring and, a bit, maybe a more positive message at the end.
Don, I have one more, and I think we'll make it our last question because typically I think social hall ends a little bit earlier. But,
Yeah, sure.
Our last question from Bonnie Skolnick is if you can comment on your thoughts about when we might be kids might be getting back to school.
Well, everything is political. So I'll just say it from maybe the data aspect of it. But it's, again, we already had our lovely CDC chair, if you will, from a place that I did a lot of work at. So Dr. Walensky, to me, said something that was truly, I'm sure she wishes she might take it back. But the government position is, according to the CDC, that kids should go back to school when they are able to do it in a safe manner. Safe manner was not really defined. My concept of a safe manner is that all the teachers should be vaccinated. They should get the same benefit that other people who are in people-facing jobs are, like us in the healthcare industry. Why shouldn't they be vaccinated? Because the little darlings are going to breathe all over them and make them sick. And, while the transmission in the school environment is remarkably low because kids are presumably maybe not as fixated on their political beliefs. And so they simply mind their manners and, wear a mask and stay away. There is going to be a certain amount of transmission. And we know, teachers have died and, that's unfortunate. Why should you die from, carrying out your profession? So my answer is when all the teachers have been vaccinated, then it's safe for the kids to go back to school. And presumably the unions, whatever you may think of them, are probably going to protest that they're going to insist that teachers go back to school, go get vaccinated before they go back to school. So that's my answer. Teachers need to be protected, as well as custodians, as well as other people who only are at those schools because they need to pick up a paycheck. The workers in the cafeteria, people take out the garbage. All those people need to be vaccinated because they didn't ask to be infected, but they may be around people who are harboring virus. We already know that people can be basically vectors that, spew out the virus, even though they don't mean to. But, when you get this virus, it's like you can't unget it. Once you get it, you got it. And so there is no second chance. So we need to, protect people from that. So
Right.
once again, thank you.
If I could ask everyone to just unmute themselves, if you don't mind, just for a moment. Give you a second to do that, if you don't mind unmuting yourselves. Thank you. Don, on behalf of the PJTC Social Hall, I'm going to turn this over to Judy in a moment to get the final remarks. But on behalf of the Social Hall, especially on behalf of the Men's Club, I want to thank you very much for your presentation tonight, for staying up with us. I know you mentioned earlier that you're about to go have dinner after we're done. So for someone who gave such a cogent discussion on an empty stomach, I'm very impressed. So thank you for that. And again, everyone, thank you for being here tonight, participating with Men's Club and Social Hall. in another one of our programs. So Don, thank you very much.
Oh, sure.
Just wanted to give a round of applause. That was the reason for the unmuting, for the well-deserved round. of
But you
applause.
know, Stu is going to be very proud of me. My numbers are going to be great now.
Great.
All right, Judy.
I want to thank Men's Club. First of all, I want to thank Don for a really enlightening talk. I want to thank Men's Club for being the sponsors of this evening. I want to remind everyone to join us next week to hear how some of our adult B'nai Mitzvah, their journey to bring them to the place where as adults they're going to become B'nai Mitzvah on the weekend of February 19th and 20th. So I encourage you to all go to services and prod them on, but first come to the social hall next week and hear their journey. I'm going to leave the